Hello and welcome to The Bottom Line here on TVP World, where we look at the latest business and economic issues. My name is Ashim Kumar. Today we're diving into a sector that might not grab daily headlines, but quietly builds the foundation of Poland's economy. Literally. The cement industry not only fuels construction, but also supports thousands of jobs and contributes billions to the national budget. However, it faces significant challenges, as Konrad Golinski will tell us in his report.
The Polish Cement Association will have some serious matters to discuss. Its members have found themselves up against the wall. The EU deadline for decarbonisation of their industry is 2034. That is when access to free CO2 allowances for the industry will be completely phased out.
Our key challenge at the moment is the EU's ambitious climate policy. It requires us to make some significant reductions in CO2 emissions. We are particularly spurred on by the date of 2034, because then we will lose our rights to free CO2 allowances.
So, what's the problem? In the cement industry, only 10% of carbon emissions come from energy use. The rest are process-related. While energy efficiency has improved, the reaction itself and the CO2 it releases is unavoidable.
The only alternative to this is to try to capture the CO2 using already existing processes called CO2 capture and storage technology, CCS or CCU.
It may seem like there's ample time left, but with carbon capture systems taking up to 10 years to design and build, 2034 is already staring them straight in the face. In Poland, the only industrial-scale CCS project is being implemented at Cementownia Kujawy, owned by Holcim. Set to be operational by 2030, it's expected to capture just 10% of the industry's total emissions. So why can't other plants in Poland's cement belt follow suit? The issue isn't capturing CO2, it's storing it. Poland hasn't approved any storage sites, and while the Kujawy plant can ship its CO2 to Norway via the Baltic Sea, inland plants are too far from the coast for that to be cost-effective.
No one is going to build a CO2 capture facility for themselves unless there is a system for receiving the CO2 and injecting it into storage sites. And right now, we have none of that, so it's years away at this point.
The industry feels that the government is not acting with sufficient urgency in the matter. And with high energy prices already cutting into producers' bottom lines, the industry fears foreign competition and plant closures.
Then we run the risk of cement coming to us from outside the EU, from the east, from Belarus, from Ukraine, or either from the Mediterranean, from Turkey, Algeria and Morocco.
With huge public expenditures on infrastructure slated for the coming years, demand for cement and concrete is expected to surge. But without swift action to meet environmental requirements, Polish firms may reap very little of the windfall.
So we know that cement will be in demand for housing, infrastructure and the defense industry. And without cement, these projects will never take off the ground. That's why it's in Poland's national interest to keep cement production in Poland and to remain independent in these key investment areas.
If Poland wants to maintain a cement industry, urgent action is needed on multiple fronts.
So how will the industry move forward from where we are today? Well, joining us to talk about that is Piotr Dybka, manager at the economic analysis team at EY Poland, to explain the urgent challenges facing this critical industry. Piotr, welcome to TVP World, and thank you very much for taking the time.
Hello. So cement industry is also a very important sector.
Sorry, before we get into the details of this, Piotr, I understand. I mean, you've written a report, you and your colleagues at EY. Give us an overview, a flavour of the key takeaways from your report.
So our report shows the importance of the cement industry for the economy of Poland. Currently, there are 12 plants producing cement in Poland, and they produce approximately 17 million tons of cement annually, which is a majority of what is used in the economy. They are providing approximately 5 billion Polish zlotys of contribution to the GDP, which stems from both direct and indirect effects. And if we look at the labor market, it's also very important because it gives directly almost 4,000 jobs. Whereas if we also include the effects generated through the supply chain, we can see that it's almost 24,000 jobs. Moreover, those jobs are often located in the areas that are less economically developed, and such plants become very important job sources. So in addition to this, what we can also see is that this sector has directly contributed 1.4 billion zlotys to the general government, whereas if we also account for indirect effects, this amounts to 3.2 billion. So this is a substantial contribution.
Yeah. Okay, certainly. I mean, I think there's, you've just clarified, there's absolutely no doubt of the importance, both in terms of employment and contributions to the government budget of the cement industry. One of your statistics actually did catch my eye. Now, Poland's the 6th largest economy by GDP in the European Union, but it's the 3rd largest producer of cement in the European. How does that work? I mean, you'd have thought they'd be in line. Why aren't they?
So what we can see is that Polish cement industry has transformed over the last 20 years. So a lot of money was invested into modification of the plants and modernization of them. So while the cement industry plants in the early 90s were quite old-fashioned, right now they have been modernized, and therefore they can produce a substantial amount of cement. What is also important, it's becoming a bit more difficult to import cement. So there is some obstacle related to transport and its feasibility. However, what plays always the most important part is the price. So if we look from the perspective of the future, we can expect that there are some challenges that are awaiting this particular sector. One of them is related to the costs of carbon emissions. So this is one very important aspect.
Yes. Now I want to come to that in detail, but before we do that, I think it's important for our audience to explain something. In particular, I'm talking about CCS, carbon capture and storage. What is that first, please?
So this is a technology that allows capturing carbon emissions. So the idea is that instead of letting them free to the atmosphere, you can capture them and then put them in the storage. So this is a way of preventing the emissions from causing the greenhouse effect.
Yes.
Yes. So from the perspective of cement industry, one important aspect needs to be taken into account. So from the technological point of view, you cannot avoid CO2 emissions. It's not related to the energy, but it's also stemming from the chemical process of producing cement. And as a result, there will always be some emissions from producing cement. And that is why the industry is very interested in developing and implementing this carbon capture storage
because
in order to avoid emitting emissions to the atmosphere.
Well, emissions into the atmosphere is financially expensive as well, is it not?
Yes, indeed, that's clearly visible. So, for instance, if we look at the data, we can see that approximately 15% of the overall contribution, of the direct contribution of cement industry to the general government, to the public finance sector, is actually related to the ETS system, which means that this is the price of the CO2 emissions that were required by the sector in order to produce cement.
All right. So in other words, there is a tax, if you like, for releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and CCS, the storage of carbon dioxide, is going to alleviate that tax. Now, what is preventing this storage from taking place now?
So first of all, there are some regulatory aspects that need to be taken account. And another thing is that such a process requires a lot of investment that is also financially very costly, and it takes time. So if we start investing in this technology now, we will still need a couple of years before we can actually implement it and use it practically.
Yes, but fines for carbon emissions aren't new, are they? They've been around for a long time. I'm conscious that the cement industry has invested billions of zloty into its production recently, but why hasn't some of that money been used to deal with the carbon dioxide emissions?
The cement industry has invested a lot in modernizing the plants. So by that, they have already reduced some of the emissions. And at first, you start with this kind of investments because they take usually less time, and they are most, I would say, from the economic point of view, this is the beginning. And now it's time to consider further steps in order to further reduce the emissions. So this is, you can see this as a process. So essentially, the industry must invest even more into decreasing the emissions.
Okay, so basically there are two issues that the industry has to deal with. One is the storage, investing in storage, and the other is further reducing emissions. I'd like to move on now to the cost of electricity that the cement industry is paying. It's one of the highest in the European Union. Why is that?
Well, once again, this stems from the energy mix structure that we have in Poland. But in addition to this, it is also worth noting that actually cement industry in Poland plays important role as they are actually using a lot of renewable fuels, mostly derived from municipal waste. So in this sense, they are also important, I would say, taker of municipal waste. And because some categories of waste are not, we are not able to recycle them. So in such a case, incineration is a second best option. And this is also used widely in Poland. Approximately 75% of heat comes from this kind of sources in Poland, whereas for the European Union, the average is a bit lower. It's approximately 55%.
So about 25% of the energy required comes from electricity, but we're still paying in Poland higher prices than the rest of Europe. Why?
So once I said this is not specific to the cement industry, it's more related to the energy mix that we have in Poland. So we rely to a large extent on coal, which coal burning generates a lot of CO2. So we have a lot of emissions. So this is one of the reasons. In addition to this, our system requires modification because the power plants that we have in Poland are relatively old. And in order to facilitate all of those costs and all of those, I would say, challenges that we face in the energy sector in Poland, the prices are becoming quite high.
Indeed. Now, I mean, as you just explained, the cement industry is closely related, of course, to the coal sector, other sources of energy, and of course, construction, which is so highly dependent on cement production. Now, facing all of these challenges, is there a danger that some of these cement producers could move outside Poland to alleviate some of those costs, the regulatory and financial burdens?
So what we can be afraid of, in a sense, is that the construction industry or the economy in general would rely more on imports. Currently, the imports constitute less than 10% of the overall cement consumption in Poland. So these are approximately 6% right now. But what we have seen is that over the years, the share of imports from the East were increasing. The reason for that was that countries like Belarus or Ukraine do not have ETS systems, so they do not have to pay for the carbon dioxide emissions. So before 2022, we saw a substantial increase in imports from Belarus, but no longer visible because in 2022 we introduced a ban on imports from this country because of the war in Ukraine. But what we see right now is that in the Ukraine is exporting more cement to Poland. It's still not such a large amount that it would be threatening to the Polish industry in the short term, but in the longer term, when we look at the challenges related to the costs of CO2 emissions, this might become a more pressing issue.
Well, Prime Minister Tusk has talked about Polonization in Poland. Would that include the cement industry, and in that way perhaps protect that industry from the threat of imports from countries like Ukraine?
It's hard for me to discuss this. Currently, the plants are owned by multinational companies that have heavily invested into modernizing them. So I do not know if any of those companies have plans to sell their business.
Okay, now I'm going to ask you to look into the future, if I may. 10 years from today, where do you see the Polish cement industry?
It's a very difficult task actually to perform because there are some challenges, but I still think that it is going to stabilize. So I would not expect that we would see more additional investments. However, I think that those plants that operate, they will keep operating. They will require investments, additional investments, but I think that they will keep operating. So I would expect the cement production to stabilize. Perhaps there would be some increase in the volume of imports, but it should not be that large. However, I need to point out that this is very difficult to forecast because there are several factors that can be at play. So.
Well, certainly there are several factors, including, of course, the construction of the storage facilities for carbon dioxide. But perhaps some light on the horizon might be alternative energy sources, such as nuclear power production, which might alleviate some of the costs. Factoring those into your thinking, do you think that would keep the cement industry in Poland, or both of those things would keep the cement industry in Poland strong?
One important thing to take into account is that it's not only related to energy per se, the problem of emissions, because vast majority of emissions come from the chemical process in which you produce clinker and from which you obtain cement. So it is one of the few industries where emissions are completely unavoidable if we want to have the cement. Even if you use some additional additives that are byproducts of other industries, you still require emissions in order to produce cement. So there are some, I would say, chemical boundaries of the CO2 reduction. So
from and therefore unavoidable in that sense.
Yes.
Understood. Piotr Dybka, sorry.
So energy transformation is not something that is the only factor that could help.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed for your analysis, Piotr Dybka, excuse me. And we look forward to enjoying you as our guest again in the near future. Have a good day, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. And that wraps up the Bottom Line today. I was your host, Ashim Kumar. We're on every weekday at 5:10 CET on TVP World. In the meantime, for the latest in regional business, follow us on X and on tvpworld.com. For more news and analysis, stay with us on TVP World. Goodbye.